It's hard to quantify which players should be considered the worst in the NBA. Sometimes a player could be decent for a couple of years, but then they have a season where they just seem completely off. Sometimes there are terrible players at the end of the bench. Every team has them, but they don't play enough minutes, so they don't hurt their team that much. However, in this video, I want to take a look at not just Killian Hayes, but several of the worst players in the NBA. Players who are destroying their own teams. Yet these guys are still getting a decent amount of playing time. How's it going, folks? My name's Andy, and today we're gonna take a look at some of the NBA's most detrimental players.
Good hands go underneath. What is he doing?
10 boards and 8 assists. Killian Hayes to the basket, missed the shot. Top side of Killian. Just a triple try. 39, I believe. Yep. Killian misses from the paint.
Oh, wow. It's creepy.
When Killian Hayes got drafted in 2020, the Pistons were not in a good situation. Not too surprising there. The Blake Griffin era ended in a failure, as he could never recover from a knee surgery that we now realize was basically a career-ending injury. They moved on from Andre Drummond, their longtime franchise player. In June of 2020, they also hired a brand new general manager, signaling the start of a new direction for the Detroit Pistons, a team that hasn't seen true playoff success since, the Chauncey Billups, Ben Wallace days. Not too long later, the Pistons were granted the 7th pick of the draft, which they used to draft Killian Hayes. Hayes initially was considered a top 5 prospect of this class, so he actually dropped a little bit. Initially, the Pistons were quite happy. They needed a point guard anyway, and what better way to kickstart a new rebuild by drafting the second best point guard of this class? Or at least that's what everyone thought. Several years of tanking have led to this moment. This was their prize, Killian Hayes. It quickly became apparent that not only was he horrible and didn't meet any of his projected strengths, but he was also one of the worst players in the entire league. Arguably the worst player of anyone who got significant playing time. In his first 4 seasons in the NBA up until now, Killian Hayes has always played at least 25 minutes a game. And coincidentally, the Pistons have been undeniably the worst team in the league during this span. Perhaps it's not a coincidence. I'm not saying Hayes is the sole reason for the Pistons' misery, but he's certainly a huge reason for it. His putrid numbers speak for themselves, yet it still doesn't truly capture how awful he is. Out of all qualified players, he is by far the least efficient scorer. And you know what's funny? This is actually the best efficiency he's ever scored at. In the past several years, he's been even worse. That's not an exaggeration either. His win shares, his plus-minus, they've all been even worse before this season, which is insane. If 2024 is the first time you're watching him, just imagine, this isn't even the worst version we've seen of him. So what about his game has led to these catastrophic numbers? Well, there are so many weaknesses in his game. It'd be a lot faster to list his strengths. Prior to the draft, despite being credited for having a high basketball IQ and feel for the game, you don't see that much, like at all. It's much more rare to see him make a good play or take a good shot. He was projected to be a good shooter, a bigger point guard who can shoot step backs and excel in catch and shoot situations. That has not worked out for him. To make matters worse, his weaknesses were worse than we imagined. Initially, there were questions of, is he fast enough? Is he athletic enough to blow by defenders? Hayes' biggest weakness is his lack of explosiveness and lateral quickness, and it's made him struggle to find separation to get an open shot. However, I don't think anyone predicted it would be this bad. In fact, I find his pre-draft scouting report to be eerily similar to someone like Frank Ntilikina. in the sense that both players were completely raw, had limited explosiveness that caused them to struggle offensively. And their teams drafted them solely based on their future potential. With both of them being from France, it's hard to gauge international prospects. Hayes never really stood out above his peers. Aside from a few great tournament games, there wasn't a huge sample size on him. The risk of him turning into a bust was quite high. To give him the benefit of the doubt, he's never played on a good team yet. Is it partly his fault? Yeah, but it doesn't help that this team is just lacking in so many areas. Hayes runs the pick and roll on over 36% of his possessions, which is a sizable chunk of his plays, yet he only manages to score 0.66 points per possession as the primary ball handler. Now that is abysmal. Most players who run it this frequently score around 0.9 to 1 point per possession. So yeah, I don't think it's all his fault. It's hard to flourish when you're surrounded by dead fish. But Hayes can also be considered a dead fish. At least he's not as bad as Isaiah Livers. There's a striking number of young players, highly ranked prospects who floundered in every single season of their career so far. Patrick Williams, the 6'7" starting power forward for the Chicago Bulls for 4 straight seasons, was another dud from the 2020 class. Drafted at number 4, Patrick Williams was one of the greatest athletes and defenders at the college level. And just like Killian, it wasn't his raw numbers that stood out. He was drafted based on his enormous potential, in particular his defense and versatility, compact in a very athletic build. Williams was cited as a tweener, a guy who wasn't a true 3 or 4. Scouts projected him to be a player similar to OG Anunoby. It was, a fair comparison when he came in, but the issue is most tweeners do not pan out. In most cases, they have a hard time establishing an identity and role within the NBA. And in the case of Williams, several years into his career and he's still one of the worst starting power forwards in the league. I'm not even sure he should be a power forward, but he doesn't have the ball handling or any perimeter skills to be a small forward either. Since he got drafted, the Bulls as a team have not been great, but they haven't been that bad either. They're kind of in, that 30 to 40 win mediocre category, I guess. Yet they have a negative 3.6 net rating with him on the floor, and plus 2.4 with him on the bench. Essentially, they are plus 6 points per 100 possessions better with him not playing. Whenever he is playing, Williams just doesn't do much. His rebounding is quite poor, and it's partly why the Bulls have been struggling in this department. The offense doesn't really try to involve him much, besides the occasional 3-point shot off a swing pass or pick and roll. To give him credit, he's been shooting well from 3. It's the bare minimum of what you need from a power forward. From judging their careers thus far, both Patrick Williams and Killian Hayes are turning out to be massive busts. As bad as they've been, neither of them are the biggest bust of this class. That honor goes to James Wiseman. Drafted at number 2 and being the projected number 1 pick in his senior year of high school, the dude was supposed to be the next great big man, but it's quite clear why Golden State gave up on him so quickly. Wiseman is probably the softest center in the entire NBA, along with having a negative basketball IQ, and he can't really do anything but catch the ball at the rim and dunk it. He can't shoot, he can't dribble, he can't even defend because he's so slow at rotating. And he sets the softest screens you'll ever see. I wouldn't be surprised if Wiseman ends up playing in China a couple years from now. Hey, at least he already knows how to speak Chinese, so that's a head start. The more I think about it, the more it looks like the 2020 draft class is turning out to be a dud. Now, it may be too early to make this judgment, but there's a startling number of super high draft picks who are struggling. And I don't mean struggling as in, oh, they're not playing so well. These 3 guys in particular are possibly 3 of the worst 10 players in the entire league, at least among players who actually get meaningful minutes. That's more than just struggling. There's a very real chance their NBA careers are closer to being over than you think. Speaking of players who play over 20 minutes a night and have very little impact on the court, look no further than Cam Reddish. playing for the Lakers in front of a much larger viewing audience, people are surprised at how bad and useless he is. But if you've been following him since he got drafted back in 2019, oh, you should know he's always been like this. The crazy part is, the Lakers give him so many minutes. Initially, he got those heavy minutes early in the year because of his defensive prowess. However, he's the prime example of when a player's defense does not make up for his lack of offense. Especially on a team like the Lakers, who already have a bottom 10 offense. Unlike the other teams I talked about, this team is desperately trying to contend for the championship in the twilight years of LeBron's career. So to have a player as bad as Cam eating up significant minutes, that's concerning. He's been in and out of the starting lineup, but out of all Lakers starters, he has the worst box plus minus and the worst scoring efficiency by a large margin. I think there's mixed opinions on Cam. For one, he has a defined role on this team. He brings hustle, energy, and active hands all over defense that certainly has helped shape this team's identity during his time here. Though this is not the type of player he envisioned himself becoming. I bring my energy defensively. Obviously, it's not like what I'm accustomed to when I was growing up and stuff, but it's the league. You just got to make the most out of every opportunity. This was a noticeable quote because Reddish was one of the most versatile offensive prospects of his class, projected to seamlessly fit in as a playmaker and huge upside as a scorer. It turns out that was a huge stretch, and he had to quickly change up his game. Since entering the league in 2019, Reddish has always been a complete non-factor on offense. You don't want this guy shooting the ball. His defense is actually the only thing keeping him on an NBA roster. Very rarely do you see a 4-year college player get picked in the top 10 of the draft. Whenever a team drafts a guy like this, the expectation is for him to contribute right away. He's not some young 18, 19-year-old who's still growing into his own body. Daven Mitchell played his first NBA game at 23 years old, and he was expected to be the replacement for Buddy Hield. Back in college, he was an incredible shooter, hitting over 45% of his threes and a very good defender to boot. The Kings hoped he could become kind of a 3-and-D role player to match up and guard the opposing team's best point guards, something that De'Aaron Fox has struggled with. In theory, drafting him made sense. He seemed like a very mature player coming in, and they tried to make it work. Daven Mitchell got a ton of playing time as a rookie. But over the years, he saw fewer and fewer minutes. As the Kings finally became good again, Mitchell's playing time dropped even further. It's completely reasonable though. If you look at his shooting numbers this year, they're god-awful. Considering shooting is the reason he got drafted, if he can't even do this at a decent rate, what's the point of playing him? Though even after moving to the bench, Mitchell has played even worse. They tried molding him into a backup playmaker, but with Malik Monk also in the backcourt coming off the bench, it's hard to play two small guys in the backcourt at the same time. By the way, outside of Monk, the Kings have a horrendous bench, which plays a role in Mitchell struggling. It makes it a lot harder for the point guard. I was kinda wondering if I should put Jordan Poole on this list, cause he's had some good years back in Golden State. He's not a terrible player. On the Wizards, however, when it comes to straight up killing your own team, tanking to the bottom of the standings, look no further than the main culprit, Jordan Poole. Going from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows is a huge change. On a team with zero expectations, and being one of the primary options, I'd imagine he'd be a lot better. I mean, there's no pressure to make the playoffs. Heck, there's no pressure to win at all. You would think he'd be more relaxed with less of a burden, but joining the Wizards has had the opposite effect. It seems like Poole has lost all motivation. When he was on the Warriors, he thrived under pressure. He's a guy who likes playing in high-stakes situations. On the Wizards, he's lacking that motivation to perform because there are no stakes. Whether his team wins or loses, it doesn't matter. And I think that's had a negative effect on his mentality. Poole is one of those players who, if he gets traded to an actual contender or any competent team, I feel like he'd play much better immediately. You can tell his talents, his skills are still there. Perhaps being a full-time starter and not playing on a team with the best shooter ever has impacted his productivity. He's gotten a lot more attention from opposing defenses, and he's not responded well. Out of all players in this video, Poole has the most talent. But out of all starters on his team, he has the worst net rating. I mean, just look at these abysmal on-off numbers. His team has a -14 net rating when he's on the court, but only a -1.9 when he's off the court. The Wizards are literally 12 or 13 points per possession better when he's not playing. It's a result of them having a relatively decent bench, at least better than you would think from looking at their record. It's their starting lineup that's atrocious, and Poole is a big part of that. Okay, you might be upset that I'm putting a rookie on this list. I've tried to avoid judging rookies, but when I was working on this video, I looked through a lot of numbers, a lot of advanced metrics and all that stuff to figure out who really were the worst players in the league. So I felt like I have to mention Scoot. Scoot Henderson is having an all-time atrocious season by a rookie or by any standards. He's getting significant playing time, which makes sense, because he's the Blazers' 3rd overall pick, and they need him to play so he can learn and improve. That doesn't take away from the fact that he literally has the worst box plus minus in the entire NBA. It's not even close either. When he's on the floor, the Blazers average 90.7 points per 100 possessions, and they give up 121.3 points per 100 possessions. I mean, I don't know what to say. The Blazers are almost as bad as the Pistons if you go by point differential. I understand they're trying to develop their young guys, giving them more experience, and not just Henderson either. Shaedon Sharpe as well got thrown into the fire. It's gonna be rough for a while, but 27 minutes a game, 12 shots a game on 36% from the field, 29% from 3, but also over 3 turnovers a game and over 3 fouls committed per game, Scoot Henderson has a legit argument for having the worst season in history, especially out of anyone with this much playing time. Of course, because there are some historically bad teams this year, his awful play has been swept under the rug. It's not yet time to panic, obviously, but this has to be somewhat concerning for Blazers fans, right? It's common to see rookies and other young players make gradual improvements over time. We'll have to wait and see. Anyway, that's all, folks. Those were some of the worst players currently in the NBA who are actively hurting their own teams. One thing in common is that they're all super young, and I made this video with the intention of finding young players who are simply not contributing to winning. For some of these guys, they've been bad for several years, and it hasn't gotten any better, so it's time to wonder, how much longer will they remain in the NBA? If you stuck around this long for the end of the video, I want to say thank you all so much for watching. Thank you for all the support over the years. I've been trying to make longer videos that are at least 15 minutes long. I feel like it gives me more time to express my thoughts clearly, and just to dive deeper into the content I'm talking about. So I hope y'all enjoyed this one. Let me know in the comments your thoughts, and of course, as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.